Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Let's kick off this week with a very interesting interview. We have with us on the line, joining us is the newly minted CEO of UEM Edgenta. This is his maiden interview as his role leading UEM. Of course, he has been on this show and on AWANI for a few times in his previous capacity after leading some very interesting transformative changes at Touch 'n Go. But in his new role as UEM Edgenta, he handles difficult challenges that he needs to navigate, not just because the group is undergoing their own version of transformation, but of course 2020 has not been kind to a lot of companies, and UEM is of course not excluded from these challenges that that the year has presented. So thanks again for taking the time to speak with us, Nizam.
Let's having me again.
Yeah, let's do a quick recap into how things have been since you started at UEM, and perhaps some of the ideas that you have now gotten, being there for a few months now, moving forward before we start to talk about the 2021 planning.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Well, I joined UEM in July, and in fact, I was probably their first CEO appointed on the virtual platform. And I think coming into the whole organization, my thought process a week before I joined was planning for my first 100 days, but my first week was already defined for me for the whole year because the organization was really in the forefront of working with the government in combating the pandemic, particularly in the work that we do with hospitals. And of course, with CMCO, we saw a dramatic drop in our highway traffic, which predominantly affected our infrastructure business. So when I came in, my year was set for me, and I think the most important part was to ensure that as a GLC, we are 100% behind the government's effort to combat this pandemic, and that our frontliners continue to provide the support that they have been doing to date for the people who are affected, as well as to ensure that our clients who are primarily affected by this pandemic are able to overcome the difficult situation. And hence, in the first, 6 months, coming to the end of my first 6 months, we've developed our own COVID playbook in order for us to prepare 2021 in full coexistence with the virus.
Of course, your name is quite familiar in the tech circle as well as in the, ICT circle, being in the previous roles of iPrintis, better known as Petronas ICT, Touch 'n Go. You are familiar with the concept of going to work in a jeans and t-shirt kind of outfit. UM isn't that. It's an infrastructure company, it's an asset management company, it's in healthcare. How's it like wearing a suit to work these days? And more importantly, how do you fit into the new mold of this structure vis-a-vis what you have done over the past decade or a few decades before this?
Thank you, Ibrahim. Well, to be honest, the first week of my tenure, I changed the dress code to smart casual immediately so that I don't feel so out of touch with what I did in fintech. But, because I'm seeing you this morning, I put on my nice double-breasted, jacket, and I thought, okay, I better look the part. But I think the more important thing is that I think the engineering, construction, and maintenance business have yet to be really disrupted by technology. And I think COVID has actually helped us to realize that there's more tech within this sector than a lot of people give credit for. I recently talked at a property conference about how asset management and maintenance and the technology that we're leveraging on with PropTech, particularly in the work that we do with commercial buildings, can help improve the livelihoods as well as the returns coming up from REITs in this country. And so what I guess we have to do, and I'm preparing the execution of these initiatives, is to actually leverage on a lot more technology in the work, making sure that to the businesses, they can realize the benefit immediately. So unlike fintech, where there is a promise to deliver something and people are excited about that promise because the technology is so fundamentally different and people like the new lifestyle, in the case of conventional businesses like this, you need to show benefits because you actually did it. And I think this is something that this industry have not seen before. Like if I say that I can reduce cost by utilizing artificial intelligence through my IoT systems that I deploy for assets that I manage, my clients will say, well, can you show me exactly how that works and how much money can I save? And I need to show that quite immediately as I implement the technology. So the difference between before and now, Ibrahim, is that the technology requires immediate gestation and delivery, compared to maybe in fintech, where you say, well, I'm working on it, I have this feature first, and then get investors to be excited for the future.
Of course, technology is just a tool to get to where you need. The sector that you guys are operating is far more crucial to be discussed in this interview. And one of these sectors that you operate in is, of course, healthcare. And of course, healthcare has been the forefront of the conversations of this year as well as next year. So what would be some of the key plans that you have in order for you to grow this aspect of the business?
I think today the main thing is that in healthcare, beyond the concession that we operate with the government here in Malaysia, we operate about 32 hospitals under the UEM Edgenta banner. We operate almost 300 hospitals in Singapore, Taiwan, and India that basically looks into non-clinical services. So the most important part about doing this business is that as a leading asset management company, we will continue to build our international portfolio to provide not just the ability to scale on our current services and technology, but also to provide jobs and employment to a lot of our frontliners. So, this area that we're doing is not something that you can wake up in the morning and do, and I think it's important that we recognize both clinical and non-clinical practitioners and frontliners, because the people who keep the hospitals clean, sanitized, operating on the back end with logistics and everything is as important, if not as important, with the doctors and the nurses. And I think as an ecosystem, I think Malaysia has one of the best support structures. So for us as a business, doing well for the Malaysian government and doing well for our international clients allow us that international credibility. And as we speak, we are tendering in a number of different hospital programs in the Middle East, as well as in Europe. So I think what we're trying to do is we want to push the boundaries of our capabilities well beyond our shores.
Yeah, which talks nicely into the next conversation that I want to have with you in terms of diversification of your business footprint. It's not easy operating in other markets before this, already we know that, but surely operating in a pandemic is terribly more difficult than before. How has UEM Edgenta overcome these kind of challenges to ensure that the deliverables that you are supposed to get from the overseas market get to be delivered on time, on schedule, and can be a little bit more beneficial over the long run, despite pandemic looming over us?
So there are two interesting things that we've done this year, and I think testament to the capability of my team. Firstly, we have built a very strong technology core, and this technology core is something that I will translate into a cloud-based service next year, where we are able to deploy all our hospital management systems, support systems through a cloud-based infrastructure, so that our regional offices can basically utilize this technology for tenders. So this year alone, Singapore and Taiwan in combination have won more than 900 million ringgit worth of jobs in these two countries. And in fact, in the case of Singapore, we now currently manage more than 11 out of the 15 public hospitals in the country. And in Taiwan, we operate more than 75% of all the government public health facilities. So what that means is that with local operations, we must augment it with technology. And the good thing about these two countries is that they actually predetermine this in the tender, that companies must have a strong technology element in delivering their services. So one part of that, interestingly enough, something I'm introducing here in Malaysia, is that we have a very strong portering service within the hospital. So this is like a Grab type service within the hospital. So instead of getting critical clinical staff like administrative or logistic services, our cleaners who are managed by an app basically are able to provide these services based on acceptance of work orders within an app. which can be generated by doctors, by nurses, or by hospital administrators. So essentially, whilst they are waiting to clean the, say, toilets or the floors, they are able to do other things. And this makes them highly more proficient and productive within the same context. And they provide KPIs to us that if we achieve certain level, then our guys and girls who are working in these operations are also incentivized to actually do more. So the whole system creates a much better, I guess, multifaceted, productive environment for people and for technology. So I call this multitasking on steroids, and it's something that I think if you ergonomically combine humans and technology, this is where we should be, particularly in conventional businesses like hospital care, as well as infrastructure.
I see. This is my point. My first question to you was this, right? How do you marry the kind of experiences that you've had over the past few decades in doing this job in terms of using technology, using front-facing, consumer front-facing companies and behaviors into this kind of, a very monolithic old type of business. And I see that there is some rejuvenation of how you guys do your things moving forward. The problem here is the transformation to get from one place to another within that company is going to be extremely difficult. How do you intend to operationalize the things that you want to do into UEM Edgenta, who has not been, I guess, known to be a little bit more quick in adopting new technologies?
Yeah, well, I think to be fair, I think the organization has attempted to be a lot more mainstream. I think they have done quite a bit in technology, to be honest, but I think they haven't really communicated it well or packaged it in the way that B2C companies that I'm familiar with Touch and Go, would have done. Primarily because the business is supporting other businesses. But you're right, there is a lot of work to do. Partly, we have to bring in new talent that is different from what we have today. One of the things that I think this organization has been quite surprised with is some of the people that I'm bringing in are not generally the engineers that they would think that I would bring in. They are younger people with completely different left field ideas, which is important for this organization. And so what I try to embed within the culture of the new Edgenta is that if we're a technology solutions company in asset management, how would we behave when the clients face problems with their asset and they want something different? It's different from the contracts they have now. How would we change? How can we adapt? So the pandemic has made us a lot more flexible in dealing with that. But the convention doesn't allow us to respond. Only new talent and new structures can respond to that. So we have an older part of the business that will evolve, but we have a younger part of the business or more mainstream part of the business that must adapt to what the client wants. So for example, if my client like Plus or even the hospital say, Nizam, I can't afford for us to pay for these services. Can you adapt? What options do you have? As a solutions company, I must be able to respond. And I think this is the most enduring factor of what we want to achieve here in Edgenta. The second part is, I mentioned this up front, we need to motivate our staff a lot more than before. I think communications is so important, particularly because we can't get physical, we can't sit down and have a decent conversation over data rate, at least without having to breach SOPs. So SOPs is so important to us, HSSC is so important to us. So I do a lot of this with my team. I also travel to make sure that from afar, I'm always there to give them that moral support. And I think it's very important, particularly for the frontliners. I did that in Kedah recently when they had to actually manage the hospitals for sanitization and also assist the government on the prison cluster that we had before. So I think, a lot of my team members face a lot of stress that people don't see. And we're focusing a lot more on emotional health now to make sure that people are provided support, both physically and mentally, to go through their daily jobs, because it's not as easy as people might make out to be. And I think it's very important for senior management to show their commitment and their support to all the staff.
You're right. Mental health care is actually quite important to look at. And we've had reports where the stress that it takes on people that deal with COVID is actually degrading in terms of their mental condition. So more support there. And it's very commendable that UEM Edgenta is actually embarking on these new ideals and new activities. But before we go into the break, I want to ask you a little bit more about still on the markets, but this time domestic, what Borneo has in store for UEM Edgenta, particularly now that we have learned a little bit more about construction budgets, a little bit more about the infrastructure requirements that is presented by Tengku Zafrul in the previous budget, and perhaps shed a little bit more light into what kind of infrastructure build that you can think about sharing with us for your work in Borneo.
Sure. We have been doing work through Propel and Opus in Sarawak primarily, and we are currently managing state road contracts as well as developing, in the case of Opus, engineering support services for the coastal road in Sarawak. At the same time, we are also building a proper regional setup in Sarawak. So what's happening is that we've had projects that we're doing with different partners, but I think it's time for us to really invest in a growing part of the country that is really looking at engineering services and infrastructure in a different way. The state government has been very progressive in adopting technology together with ourselves and the local partners. We'll be partnering with a number of the state entities to see how we can best leverage our knowledge and technology in infrastructure services, but primarily to support them in their growth agenda. But I also see Sarawak as our base for Indonesia in the future as well. We have currently an operation in Indonesia managing one of the highways, Cikampek Palimanan, together with our partners Astro. But if you see how the Indonesian government is moving towards Kalimantan as their new administrative capital and the development that's going to happen there, we feel that we are better positioned together with our partners in Sarawak to really capitalize in this area. So yes, I think importantly for Edgenta, the infrastructure play will have a more significant sort of focus in Sarawak primarily. We do have joint ventures with hospital management in both Sarawak and Sabah, managing the local concessions with MOH. But we feel that the infrastructure play will be the main focus for Edgenta moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's the best place to be, actually. Yes, you're right about the entry towards Indonesia. We'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Nizam of UEM Edgenta. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. On the line with us is the CEO of UEM Edgenta, Syahrunizam Samsudin. Nizam, let's talk a little bit more about the whole idea of your client base. We've had a very lengthy conversation thus far of your business operations. It seems like UEM Edgenta relies a lot in terms of government as your client base, either state government, federal government, this country's government, or other countries' government. Is it time for you to diversify your client base to include the corporate sectors as well in the amount of, I guess, private versus public kind of pie share in terms of client base?
Sure. I think that's a fair point. When I came in, this company probably had half its revenue contributed by a single client. And I think that represents both healthcare as well as infrastructure. Over the years, our property facility solution have tried to diversify that, including both local commercial buildings with corporate JLCs as well as organizations, as well as that in Dubai. So we've contributed another 14% to that pie, which is external to the concession business. And then we have another balance of 35, which is basically the commercial healthcare, which is actually outside of the concession business because we all have to enter into competitive tenders, even though they are for private or public hospitals in Singapore and Taiwan. But we feel that should have been seen as something that's external. So I think the most important part is that on the one hand, we must diversify and we must find a way to scale our operations beyond the physicality of the people needing to be there, which is why I'm setting up the Edgenta Cloud. We're building relationships with partners in different parts of the world so that they can deploy the people, we can deploy the technology. And interestingly enough, I'm working with a number of technology companies to look at how we can deploy software as a service and infrastructure as a service as an asset management solutions company. So I can provide this service to anyone without having to worry about deploying people, because now a lot of companies are saying, well, Nizam, I'm doing insourcing, so I want to keep the people that I have for facilities management, but can I use your system? Can I use your IoT capability? And the answer is yes. So I'm moving into a more subscription-based model. So hopefully that will allow me greater flexibility to diversify. It may not provide the lumpy long-term cash flows that my investors are used to, but I think this is a bit of the new normal as we diversify. But the base of our 12.3 billion order book, which stands till 2038, is still there. So I think the good thing about being an investor in Edgenta is you have that order book secured, but perhaps in this current time, we're just sort of reviewing the operational efficiency, cost management of these contracts. But as we diversify, we're going to diversify in a lot different way than before. And I think tendering is not going to be the only way we can grow, and it's going to be more competitive as more companies are domesticated because they are unable to expand internationally for various reasons. So it's very important that we champion this cause moving forward.
No, I mean, that's right. I mean, we're not saying that the company is in trouble by any measure. You guys are doing okay. That 12.3 billion order book, and of course, the 0.33 gearing ratio is also quite interesting, which begs the question, do you intend to, go to the market, get more money, do more jobs, do more infrastructure? Is there, a possibility of even a sukuk being raised? What's the story in terms of growing the company, in terms of financially empowering yourself through debt?
Well, firstly, I think there's room in our balance sheet to grow. We have a sukuk in place, although our finance team is reviewing, looking at whether we need a bigger amount to focus on longer term projects. So one is that we are looking at longer term projects that we could actually fund or co-fund, both in terms of a concession period or in terms of a PFI type arrangement that is beneficial for both parties. Ourselves and the government. It's not limited to only the government of Malaysia. We're also reviewing our risk profile in certain markets to see whether or not we should be a lot more able to look at slightly lower hurdle rates, but better long-term returns. That's one. Secondly, obviously, I'm taking a hidden tiger or crouching tiger, hidden dragon approach. I want to pounce on opportunistic situations where we're able to look at M&A as an outlet for our growth. One of the things that we're building internally is our new digital healthcare ecosystem, which will basically provide digital platforms for doctors and clinics to offer services to their mainstream clients and to help them boost their ability to offer services, as we feel that the future of healthcare is going to be a lot more mobile, a lot more driven by AI, and a lot more driven by conscientiousness and data by the consumers. So I think the idea here is that UEM Edgenta is able to provide that for the larger good of not just Malaysian clinics and healthcare operators, but also the countries that we want to focus on. I think there's an opportunity for us to build a completely different segment altogether. So I think my corporate team is working overtime, looking at different options, because I think as a defensive counter, my fundamental focus is still on generating long-term dividend growth for my investors. I still want to create businesses that provide positive cash flows. But more importantly now, with the tech element, we can provide a number of growth stories that our investors could be looking for.
Fantastic. I do believe that, because of the learnings that you have gotten from touching this is going to be extremely crucial for you to include this in your business model for UEM Edgenta. Final word, 2020 is not a good year for corporate earnings in general. What's it going to be like for UEM Edgenta when it comes to corporate earnings for this year?
I think, as I mentioned in my third quarter report, as well as that the second quarter, I'm going to continue to look at getting rid of a lot of the legacy issues within Edgenta. The non-core businesses will continue to be trimmed down. We have taken an impairment on our earnings based on our defocus on property. We're not going to be focusing on property development as we did in the past. But more importantly, I want to start 2021 on a relatively clean slate, Ibrahim. I really want to to give investors the sense that, it's very hard for me to solve.
All of us can't wait for 2021, but I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I don't believe 2021 is going to be a little bit different from 2020. I'm so sorry, but yes, go on with your.
You're right. But then it's better if you don't have problems of the past chasing you from behind, right? So I think it's better to be sort of a little bit lighter, a little bit focused. You know that you're going to go through a roller coaster of a year. I think this pandemic is far from over, and I think the solution is probably more difficult than the actual problem itself. And I think what we have to do as Malaysians and as responsible corporate citizens is really to push through more innovation and just tell our teams that, look, nobody's gone through this before. But what is needed by this country is a lot of dedicated men and women who are able to come up with new things, new ideas. And as long as Edgenta is around and we are primarily owned by Khazanah National and we have a national agenda, we will continue to support the country through this difficult period and also our clients. So I think that's our focus, Ibrahim. Earnings will be challenged, but I'm very confident that with the envelope of the order book, we will still come good with our investors. So I think the story is positive to neutral. Although I'm an optimist. Being in tech, you have to always be an optimist. But given the circumstances we're in, I have enough people surrounding me telling me that it's not going to be so good. But I try to keep positive for my people.
Fantastic. That's an excellent way to end. That was Syahrunizam. Of course, we wish you all the best, and we wish everyone at UEM Edgenta all the best moving forward. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astro.com, look for Notepad over there. If you've missed also the kind of conversation that we've had with Nizam, do check it out on our app. Download the app on the Google Play as well as the Apple App Stores. Search for Astro AWANI. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.